Ed here with the Digital Digest, and today I wanted to share a quick update on my experience with the Sony CyberShot DSC RX10 Mark III. Priced at $1,500 US, you're looking at the most expensive bridge style camera ever made, and for good reason. We have a 1-inch 20 megapixel sensor, and here in the third gen of the RX10 lineup of cameras from Sony, we now have a much longer piece of Carl Zeiss glass. Granted, we have a variable aperture that is f2.4 to f4, which is still very good in my opinion. But again, the aperture range aside, you've got a piece of glass now that reaches from 24 all the way out to 600 millimeters. And if you employ something like clear image zoom, Sony's, I'll say, prerequisite to jumping to digital zoom, which does a very nice job using Sony's own proprietary algorithm, you can take this thing really ultimately all the way out to 1200 millimeters and still retain pretty good image detail. Would I say that it's going to be in the same league as an APS-C or full-frame camera? Of course not. Depth of field is not going to be there, but if you're looking for the all-in-one solution, that's exactly what the RX10 camera line has always been about. They've also added some things and taken some things away. First and foremost, no neutral density filter. So for those of you that loved that the first and second gen RX10 had an ND filter for video purposes built in, you're out of luck here. But for those of you that were always hoping, wishing, waiting for a much longer lens than the 18-200 fixed aperture lens found on the first two generations, you've got that. Also, I've gotten many questions before receiving this camera finally to test out about whether or not there's a bump in that zoom, meaning as you go through the course of zooming out, as you just saw me do, from its wide to end of its telephoto reach, it is completely smooth across that zoom range. So you're not going to see that wiggle that existed or bump in the RX10 Mark II. 4K video, very clean on this. Of course, at 600 millimeters, you are going to need some form of stabilization beyond the traditional steady shot that's incorporated here, because you can't use any of the higher forms of steady shot on this camera when shooting XAVC HD 4K footage. Of course, you can select from a variety of different bit rates, 100 being the highest, as is on any Sony camera right now. And I have to say the 1-inch sensor does very well. And I will be posting video samples to demonstrate that as I spend more time with it. But so far, I've been very impressed. For those of you wondering about performance of the EVF, it is solid. Is it as good as something like the A6300 or Sony's A7R Mark II or A7S Mark II? Absolutely not. But still, very, very good, and I could easily see why this would be such an appealing camera for someone who wants to travel light, even though this is heavy, but in other words, not needing anything other than this and maybe a pocketable point and shoot, much like the RX100 Mark IV, or for that matter, any of the RX100 cameras that have ever been made. I think that's a phenomenal pairing, and that's a video I'll be doing as well, because I really do think that those are pretty much the only two cameras that a person really needs, unless they're out to take professional quality stills or make incredibly large prints, which a camera like this can really do still, even though, again, it doesn't have the qualities and characteristics of full-frame APS-C or even Micro Four Thirds when it comes to sensor size. So while many of the images may not blow people away, the flexibility and capability of this camera are what really are aimed at impressing users and satisfying them. Now, I mentioned in my unboxing that we have a mic input, headphone jack for monitoring, multi-port for accessories such as shutter release. Also, that does do on-body charging, of course, and an HDMI port. These are, again, weather sealed. Sony's also incorporated, you can see right here, a focus lock button, something that you would traditionally find on things like the 70 to 200 f4G piece of full frame glass that I have for my A7R Mark II, or of course that you would find on A-mount 70 to 200 pieces of glass. So yet another professional feature that Sony has decided to build into a point-and-shoot camera. A lot of customization, nice readout here on the top LCD, which has been there for every generation, but just again, I actually happen to like the balance of this camera quite a bit. I've seen some feedback where people feel it's a little bit too heavy or actually aren't satisfied with the balance. I think that considering you're walking around with a lens that does give you a 600 millimeter reach in terms of 35 millimeter equivalency, it is an amazing feat. And right now, as it stands, no one else has anything else on the market that can match this, which is what Sony tends to be really good at doing, which is setting the bar higher. And while I mentioned in my unboxing, I wish this is what the first or even second gen RX10 had offered. Well, the good news is we do have it here now, even if it is at an astronomical $1,500 price tag, which I know in other countries will be more or possibly less, even though the U.S. tends to get the benefit of pricing, since, after all, the United States is the largest consumer of just about everything electronic. In terms of, and that's not a knock against anyone else in other nations, it's just a fact of retail pricing. And the strength of the dollar does come into play as well. Also, really love that they've continued, to keep the SD card here on the side of the camera, much like they do with, higher end cameras, the A7R. This is where really memory cards belong, especially if you're shooting for a prolonged period of time. You do want the SD card not to be buried with the battery at the bottom of the camera. Also, for those of you wondering about overheating with 4K video, no overheating thus far in my experience. Of course, I'm going to continue testing, but I have not seen any overheats. Keep in mind, you are limited in your video clip length to, again, that's a hair under 30 minutes, as all still cameras are. Otherwise, they would be classified as video cameras. In terms of menus, just a quick look for those of you that are really curious. And I do recommend seeing this in a store, as I always do. Whenever I share a product, you can see the menu button is here on the left-hand side of the camera, but just a quick jump through the menus. You can see right here, image size I have set to 20 megapixels currently, 3:2 aspect ratio. The quality, of course, you have the ability to go extra fine, RAW and JPEG or RAW. This is fairly standard for Sony users. You're going to know that right out of the box without me telling you that. And then, of course, dual record does exist as well, which is a nice additional feature to have, not necessarily something you need to lean on. Another great thing about this camera is that you're going to be able to pull stills from your 4K video, even at those extended clear image up to, as I mentioned earlier, 1200 millimeter zoom shots, and that is again with video, although you will need something to brace this. Even with that steady shot compensating for hand movement, I can tell you right now, you're best off on a tripod, monopod, whatever, pistol grip, whatever it may be. You will want something to support this because, again, you are actually taking this lens out to 600 millimeters, which is frankly insane up until this camera now exists and is a reality. You can see the XAVC S4K video mode there, 30p, 100 megabits. You can see we can drop that down to pretty much all the settings that existed before. And you can also go with traditional XAVC SHD. You can drop it down to AVC HD or even MP4 if you are looking for smaller file size and aren't as interested in the 4K capability. HFR settings, this is for those of you that are interested in high-speed video so that you have slow motion capability. You can see right there we have 60p at 50 megs a second, 240 frames. You can take that all the way up to 960, but I wouldn't really recommend going over 240 simply because your quality is going to degrade no matter what setting you have here in terms of your frame rate and bit rate. Jumping back, going out of this, The Wi-Fi, gotta go to hit the menu button here. The Wi-Fi capability on this camera is pretty much the same so far, in my experience, as I find on all Sony cameras, which I do wish Sony would step up the game a little bit, give us a new Wi-Fi chipset. I may be wrong, maybe this is a new chipset, but at least in my experience, it seems about the same. And the fact that we still have no touch screen, even though I tend to not really care about that, let's face facts, when dealing with Wi-Fi, things of that nature, it would be great if we had a touch screen, whether it's entering, passwords for networks, whatever it may be, direct connections with phones. Even though once you set it up, it's a breeze, the setup process would be even easier if we had touchscreen. It also would be great to have touch to focus, but that's a critique that you could make of all Sony cameras that are missing that feature clearly. Beyond that, taking you through more menus, just a quick look. Drive mode, camera's incredibly fast. The autofocus has so far served me quite well. Will it hunt at the long end of the 600 millimeter Zeiss lens? Absolutely. But considering that even though we lost that fixed aperture, to still top out at f4 is pretty impressive. Other things that are noteworthy as I jump through this, I mean, everything is here that you had on previous generations. So you're not going to get a whole lot beyond what I've mentioned. Again, a reminder with the steady shot in 4K, standard is all you're going to get. You're going to see when I jump down to steady shot for the video setting, both active and intelligent active are grayed out. If I was not shooting in 4K, we would be able to get access to that. Now, if you want the highest quality video, put this thing on a tripod and turn steady shot off altogether. That's always been the case and remains the same here with the RX10 Mark III. Pretty good, I would say, really professional control in just about every other regard, and that's what makes this camera unique. Even though it is a bridge-style camera, you are looking at something that can competently replace many APS-C and Micro Four Thirds solutions. Would I go as far as saying full frame? That's a stretch, and that will inherently be a question for many of you because of the $1,500 price tag. But if it is a question for you, then you really probably should be looking at something else, because Sony has designed this for convenience and not best overall performance. I mean, again, that is the major selling point of this camera. It's that it can deliver what no other camera can in a single body with a single lens and one sensor. So if your objective is to travel light, even though this is a heavy, I would say even beast of a camera, you will accomplish that goal using this as your do-it-all. Of course, you don't need to have a pocketable or pocket-friendly camera, but it would pay off in situations where you don't want to carry around something of this size and nature, because clearly, even though this does have a nice wide angle starting point, you don't always need 600 millimeters of reach. But so far from what I've seen, it is really impressive and amazing if that is what you're after. Face recognition, customization of the actual zoom ring, whether you want it to control focus or zoom. These are not new things, but again, just wanted to show it. The movie button, turning that on and off. Absolutely prefer the placement of the movie button here as opposed to on other Sony cameras. So, I mean, that pretty much covers at least what I wanted to talk about in the update today. I believe we do have clean HDMI, 4K output on here, for those of you wondering. We also, of course, still have video grading capability. S-Log is here. I mean, it's Sony's signature. Why wouldn't it be? And the onboard audio is also surprisingly good. That doesn't mean you won't want to use some external audio sources with something with this sort of capability. But for onboard microphones right there mounted at the top, I am impressed. Going around the balance of the body, of course, the flash I mentioned in my unboxing, it is bounceable, and that's definitely a good thing. Sony has on some of their cameras taken a step back with that here. they've retained that, and they should, because this is an all-in-one that is supposed to be able to do everything. I mean, that's the whole reason we have that clickable aperture ring that we can, switch on and off, so that we can have smooth, silent aperture changes for video, and then, of course, click to your heart's content for still imaging. The NFC contact point works exactly as it should, and again, the most important thing really for me so far has been that the autofocus has been fairly good, considering, one might have hoped at this price point we were going to somehow get a hybrid autofocus system, not just a contrast one, but including phase detection, which we didn't. And then also that even at the long end and wide end of this lens, images are still fairly sharp. Are they perfect? No, but that's what you expect as part of the compromise of a bridge camera. And then to even include a lock hold button for your focus, again, that traditionally would only be found on very expensive lenses, as I mentioned, like the FEG series 70 to 200 millimeter piece of glass. It's just another sign that Sony knew that if they were going to up the price of this camera, they were going to have to change its entire identity. And that's pretty much what they've done here at the expense of a neutral density filter and, variable aperture, which I would take any day of the week. And I know there are many of you out there that would prefer to have those two items. That's why the RX10 Mark II and 1 still exist. You still have other options. For those of you that were waiting for this, aka much more reach and essentially a more versatile camera, both in the still and video world, not one that only favors video, because the RX10 became famous for its video prowess. Well, now you have, in my opinion, a far better hybrid. And many videographers will disagree and say, that variable aperture and, losing the ND filter is a game breaker. I would argue that most consumers that aren't videographers that are interested in this camera are going to wholeheartedly welcome these improvements and really will feel that this is a solid upgrade. And if you're sitting at home with an RX10 original or even a Mark II now, I would see many good reasons to consider upgrading to this, despite the incredible cost difference between the two models or three models. And even if you own a Panasonic FZ1000, again, half the price, but when I start telling you that 1200 millimeter shots look solid on this, even when at 100% crop, I think that's going to make a lot of Panasonic FZ1000 owners wonder whether or not they should be taking a look at this camera too, if they care about having a mega zoom with solid image quality and phenomenal 4K video capability. So that pretty much covers my update. I know it ran quite long here, over 18 minutes, but hopefully that gives all of you an idea of what you're getting for $1,500 right now. As I said, video samples will follow. Any questions or comments, please feel free to post them. As usual, hit that like button, and of course, feel free to subscribe. Later.